Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. This coming week is a special one for me. I'm marking the time with a couple of not bookish videos, but the videos are about storytelling and maybe about fiction. So today I present two lies and a truth. One of these stories is true. Story number 1, How We Met. When I was in graduate school in history, I found myself in the emergency room a couple of days before Valentine's Day with abdominal pain. A young man in a short white coat walked into my examining room. I whined to myself, another in the long chain of medical students and residents who've come to learn from my case of simple appendicitis. Because I was learning to be a teacher, and because I had a very high pain threshold, I must have seemed to be a good patient to introduce to students, someone willing to answer their questions again and again. The fact that the teaching docs knew I was getting free medical care because I was at my university's hospital must have made their decision even easier. This young man was different, though. His eyes were mesmerizing and calming at the same time. They still are. David was charged with giving me a mental status exam and gave me 3 random words to remember. He was supposed to ask me to repeat those words after 5 minutes, but we got so carried away in conversation that he never asked me to say them back. I still remember the 3 words all these years later. Spruce Street, baseball, palladium. Eventually, he ran out of the room, hastily explaining he needed to give his findings to his attending. David returned a few minutes later, and we continued our conversation. Hours seemed to pass. He sat down and seemed to have all the time in the world to comfort me and keep me company. We shared our intellectual interests, our favorite authors, our family backgrounds, the importance of our brothers in our lives. We talked about our dreams, our politics, justice, social activism, the meaning of ritual in our lives, etc. It turns out David did not have to be there at all. I was supposed to be his last quick interview. Finally, he was supposed to be able to leave the hospital after his long stint on call. But he didn't. He stayed with me, a total stranger, alone in a hospital room, facing surgery the next day. He stopped by to see me after my surgery. The next morning, when I was well enough to go home, he offered to drive me the half-mile down the road to my apartment. Do I really know him well enough to get in his car? I thought to myself. His car was an old beater with a Fisher-Price toy phone that he joked was his car phone. I felt like I was glowing the whole ride home. Of course, the answer to my question was yes. I knew him well enough. I knew him deep down and better than people I had known all my life. And I've got the scar to prove it. Story number 2, Meeting the Parents. 27 years ago, when David and I were preparing our first real dating Valentine's Day, his parents announced the week before Valentine's Day that they would be passing through town on the 14th and would like to have lunch. They suggested that David bring me to meet them for the first time. I was excited but nervous. Were we really serious enough for a meet the parents session? On Valentine's Day, no less? A couple of days before they arrived, I went to student health with what I thought was a sinus infection. They sent me directly to the neurologist, who sent me directly to get an MRI. While I was in the machine, the doc headed out to grab a bite. When I returned from the scan, I found Dr. Pleasure, his real name, holding the film in one hand and a slice of pizza in the other. "Thank goodness," he said. "I thought you had multiple sclerosis. It's only a brain tumor." I was immediately admitted to the hospital, and my mother flew up on the 14th to be with me in time for my surgery. Instead of me meeting David's parents that Valentine's Day, he met mine. While I was in the operating room, the two of them, along with many of my grad school friends, danced the evening away in the hospital waiting room. David stayed all night to look after my mother. I loved him even more after that, and I've got the scar to prove it. Story number 3. Never knit your boyfriend a sweater. Many years ago, on our third Valentine's Day, David and I were pretty sure we were in it for the long haul. While he was on an away rotation, studying medicine at a hospital in a very different kind of community, I decided to knit him a sweater. At that time, I did not know the prescription against knitting your sweetie a sweater before you were really committed. Otherwise, something would happen and the two of you would never marry. I suspect it wouldn't have fazed me in any way had I known. Just a silly old wives' tale. And while I was ready to commit, I wasn't so sure I wanted to be a real wife with all the baggage that legal marriage carries. Although I had knit as a child and as a teenager and as a college student, I had not knit during grad school. Looking back, I'm amazed. There's no more perfect time to knit than graduate school. Due to a disturbance with my hearing and vestibular nerve, I have lousy balance and fall fairly frequently. At that time, my balance issues were significant enough that I often used a cane to help me stabilize. Nevertheless, I headed out into the February snow to my local yarn store, climbed down the stairs from the street, picked out some light Icelandic yarn in a couple of neutral colors, and sketched out a basic sweater pattern with the owners. I picked up a couple of pairs of straight knitting needles, size 6 and 8, and threw them in the bag. After paying, I climbed back to the street. Except I slipped on the icy stairs. I tried to catch myself, but missed the rail and fell hard under the side of my bag. One of the knitting needles plunged into my soft belly and pierced the skin rather deeply. I caught a cab home and was fine after cleaning myself up, bandaging the wound, taking some serious pain relievers, and having a long sleep. The idea of knitting a sweater lost all its charm. Don't knit your boyfriend a sweater, indeed. I put the yarn in the top of my closet, creating my first real stash. The sweater didn't get knit until the next Valentine's Day, but from then on I was hooked. David and I have been knitted together ever since, and I've got the scar to prove it. So, which is it? Give me your guesses in the comments below. I'll post a video on the 16th telling you which one is the correct story. Thanks for joining me for this silly game. See you soon.